Alexander Reed didn't request things. He commanded them. His corner office, a glass fortress 38 floors above Manhattan, witnessed daily displays of this power. Today was no different. The Tokyo deal is critical. "You're coming with me," he said without looking up from his monitor. Emma Carter paused at his doorway, manila folder pressed against her chest like a shield. "I assume Johnson would accompany you, sir. He handled the preliminary negotiations." Alexander finally looked up, his steel-gray eyes narrowing slightly. "Johnson lacks attention to detail." What he didn't say. Johnson didn't anticipate his needs the way Emma did. Didn't know when to speak and when to remain silent. Didn't understand that Alexander preferred his coffee black in the morning, but with a splash of cream after 2 p.m. 5 years, Emma had worked as his executive assistant. 5 years of perfect synchronicity. She knew his schedule better than he did, could predict his decisions before he made them, and maintained a professional distance that suited them both. "The Nakamura merger could double our Asian market share," he continued, his voice betraying no emotion. "I need someone who won't miss anything." Emma nodded once, her face a careful mask of efficiency. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pack for a week." If the short notice bothered her, she didn't show it. That was another thing he appreciated about Emma, her unflappability. In an office full of people who either feared him or tried too hard to impress him, her quiet competence was a relief. "I'll adjust your calendar and prepare the briefing materials," she said, already tapping notes into her tablet. Alexander returned to his screen. The matter settled. He didn't see the slight tremble in her fingers, or the way she took a deep breath once she turned away. The Reed Enterprises headquarters hummed with the energy of success and ambition. Alexander had built his technology empire from nothing, transforming a small software company into a global powerhouse through sheer force of will and ruthless strategy. At 42, he was exactly where he'd planned to be. At the top, untouchable, in control. Emma slipped back to her desk, adjacent to his office. Her space was as ordered as she was, everything in its place. Nothing personal, except a small potted succulent. She began methodically reorganizing his schedule, canceling meetings, arranging for his absence. Her efficiency masked the storm inside her. A week in Tokyo, with him. Away from the protective boundaries of their office routine. Carter. She looked up to find Alexander standing at her desk, hands in the pockets of his immaculately tailored suit. "The files on Nakamura's subsidiary acquisitions. I need them before the end of day." "They're already in your inbox. I sent them while you were in your budget meeting." A flicker of something. Surprise. Perhaps appreciation. Crossed his face before disappearing. "Of course you did." Their eyes met for a brief moment. Emma was the first to look away, focusing on her screen. Alexander lingered a second longer than necessary. "Have you been to Tokyo before?" The personal question caught her off guard. "No. It's intense. The sensory overload can be distracting." Was that concern in his voice? Emma couldn't tell. In 5 years, their conversations had never strayed beyond work. "I'll manage, Mr. Reed." He nodded once and returned to his office, closing the glass door behind him. Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Colleagues often mistook her quietness for shyness or timidity. They didn't understand it was a choice, a carefully constructed wall. Growing up with 4 boisterous brothers in a small house had taught her the power of observation, of speaking only when necessary. In the corporate world, this restraint had become her strength. Alexander Reed might be known for his emotional detachment, but Emma had her own armor. By 6 o'clock, the office had emptied. Emma remained, finalizing details for their trip. Through the glass wall, she could see Alexander still at his desk, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms as he reviewed documents. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate. "Still coming to Jen's birthday drinks." Emma sighed. "Can't. Heading to Tokyo tomorrow with Reed." The response came immediately. "OMG, a week with the Ice King." Rip. Emma smiled slightly at the nickname. The staff called him that behind his back. The Ice King, the machine, the Terminator. They saw only his cold exterior, his demanding standards. They didn't see what she saw. The way his jaw tightened when he had to fire someone. The extra zeros he quietly added to employee emergency funds. the fact that he remembered every detail about ongoing projects, but never took credit for others' work. Her phone buzzed again. Don't let him work you to death. And please tell me you're packing something other than those librarian outfits. Emma glanced down at her modest navy dress and sensible pumps, then at her boss through the glass. There was safety in being invisible, in being seen only for her competence. Alexander looked up suddenly, catching her gaze. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. Emma broke first, returning to her screen. But something had shifted. A hairline fracture in the perfect professional distance they'd maintained for 5 years. Tomorrow, they would board his private jet, cross an ocean, and step into a different world, one without the buffer of office politics and familiar routines. Emma shut down her computer with a decisive click. Whatever happened in Tokyo, she would maintain her boundaries. Alexander Reed might control his empire with an iron will, but Emma Carter controlled herself with quiet steel. She had no idea how quickly both would begin to rust. The private jet hummed steadily over the Pacific. Emma sat across from Alexander, her laptop open, reviewing the Nakamura dossier for the 3rd time. The cabin was luxurious, but intimate, too intimate, without the buffer of ringing phones and interrupting colleagues. The air between them felt charged with an unfamiliar tension. Their CFO, Tanaka, will be the hardest to convince, Alexander said, breaking the silence. He's old school, skeptical of Western expansion. Emma nodded. I noticed he rejected 3 previous partnership offers. His concerns seemed to be cultural preservation, rather than financial. Alexander raised an eyebrow. You researched his personal history? It seemed relevant. She hesitated before adding. He lost his father's company to an American buyout in the 90s. The new owners dismantled it within a year. A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. This is why you're here, Carter. You see the human element I miss. The compliment, rare and unexpected, warmed her face. She quickly looked down at her notes. Get some rest, he said after a moment. We have 18 hours before we land, but rest proved impossible. Even after dimming the lights and reclining her seat, Emma remained acutely aware of Alexander's presence. He'd removed his suit jacket and tie, the top buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a glimpse of collarbone. In the soft cabin light, with his guard lowered by fatigue, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man, a handsome man. She closed her eyes firmly against the thought. Hours later, they arrived at their hotel, a gleaming tower of steel and glass in the heart of Tokyo. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalist luxury, all polished surfaces and hushed efficiency. Mr. Reed, Miss Carter, welcome. The manager greeted them with a deep bow. We've prepared your adjoining suites as requested. Emma's stomach tightened. Adjoining suites. She hadn't been consulted on the arrangements. The elevator whisked them to the top floor. Their suites mirrored each other. Spacious rooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering panoramic views of the city. A door connected them, currently closed, but present like a question mark. We should prepare for tomorrow's preliminary meeting, Alexander said as the bellhop departed. My suite, 1 hour. Emma nodded and retreated to her room. She showered quickly, trying to wash away 20 hours of travel. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale and tired. She twisted her damp hair into its usual neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and changed into fresh clothes. A simple black skirt and cream blouse, professional and forgettable. An hour later, they sat surrounded by papers in Alexander's suite. Takeout containers pushed aside. The Tokyo skyline glittered beyond the windows, a galaxy of lights against the night sky. Their tech division is undervalued, Alexander said, circling figures on a report. If we... He stopped mid-sentence and squinted at the page. Emma reached into her bag and wordlessly handed him a pair of reading glasses. He stared at them. How did you know? You've been holding documents at arm's length for months. I ordered these based on your last eye exam. Alexander took the glasses, a strange expression crossing his face. You notice everything, don't you? It's my job, she replied simply. Is that all it is? A job? The question hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Before she could answer, he continued. I grew up with nothing, you know. Southside Chicago. Single mother working 3 jobs. He put on the glasses and returned to the report. People think I'm obsessed with control because of ambition. It's not that. It's survival. The personal revelation stunned her. In 5 years, he'd never spoken of his past. My father left when I was 4, she found herself saying. My mother raised 5 kids on a teacher's salary in rural Minnesota. I learned to be invisible. It was easier that way. Alexander looked up, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time. You're not invisible, Emma. You never have been. Not to me. It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver down her spine. We should focus on the meeting, she said, retreating to safer ground. They worked until 2 a.m. The easy rhythm of their professional partnership gradually returning as Emma gathered her notes to leave. Alexander stood to help her. Their hands brushed as he passed her a folder. Just a momentary touch, skin against skin. But it sent an electric current through her body. They both froze, the contact lingering a second too long. Emma pulled away first. Good night, Mr. Reed. Alexander, he corrected softly. When it's just us, call me Alexander. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, and hurried to her suite. The connecting door between their rooms seemed to pulse with possibility as she locked her side. In bed, sleep eluded her. She could hear him moving in the next room, the sound of water running, footsteps, the soft thud of what might have been a book closing. A thin wall and a locked door separated them. But something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they'd maintained for years was eroding, revealing dangerous new territory beneath. Emma stared at the ceiling, remembering the warmth of his hand against hers, the way he'd said her name. Tomorrow, she would rebuild her professional walls. She allowed herself to wonder what might happen if she didn't. Emma woke before sunrise, sleep having come in fitful bursts. The digital clock read 5:17 a.m. Their first meeting wasn't until 10. But her body hummed with restless energy. The hotel brochure on her nightstand mentioned a rooftop infinity pool. Empty at this hour, it promised solitude, exactly what she needed to clear her head. She changed into the one-piece black swimsuit she'd packed as an afterthought, covering it with a hotel robe. Her hair, freed from its usual tight bun, fell past her shoulders in soft waves. Without her glasses, her face looked different, younger, less guarded. The elevator opened directly onto the rooftop level. Emma stepped out into the cool morning air and caught her breath. The pool stretched before her, its edge seeming to merge with the Tokyo skyline. Dawn was just breaking, painting the eastern sky in watercolor strokes of pink and gold. She slipped off her robe and entered the water, which was heated to perfect warmth. For the first time since leaving New York, she felt herself relax. Here she wasn't Alexander Reed's assistant. She was just Emma, floating in water that reflected the awakening sky, anonymous and free. Alexander had always been an early riser. Years of discipline had trained his body to need little sleep. He'd gone for a run through the quiet Tokyo streets, pushing himself harder than usual, trying to outpace the thoughts that had kept him awake most of the night. Thoughts of Emma. The way she'd looked in the soft light of his suite. The quiet strength behind her composed exterior. The brief touch of her hand that had sent an unexpected jolt through his system. He took the elevator to the rooftop, intending to cool down before showering. The doors opened, and he stepped out, then stopped abruptly. Emma was in the pool, floating on her back, eyes closed. Her dark hair spread around her like ink in water. The rising sun gilded her skin, transforming her from the efficient assistant who lived in his peripheral vision to a woman of startling beauty. Alexander couldn't move, couldn't breathe. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him, a tectonic plate moving beneath the careful structure of his life. Emma sensed his presence and opened her eyes. Seeing him, she quickly righted herself in the water, one hand instinctively rising to her bare shoulder. Mr. Reed, I didn't expect anyone else to be up here. Alexander, he reminded her, his voice rougher than he intended. I was running. She nodded, treading water, suddenly acutely aware of her exposed skin and wet hair. Without her usual armor of modest clothing and perfect professionalism, she felt vulnerable. The view is incredible, she said, gesturing toward the cityscape to fill the awkward silence. Alexander approached the edge of the pool, his running clothes dark with sweat. Tokyo has always been my favorite city. Everything works with precision here. Is that what you value most? Precision. The question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes met hers, intense and unreadable. I used to think so. The weight of unsaid words hung between them. Emma swam to the pool's edge, a few feet from where he stood. The meeting with Nakamura is in 4 hours, she said, retreating to the safety of work. I've prepared a cultural briefing on each executive. Alexander nodded, but his eyes never left her face. You look different. I don't have my glasses, she explained, suddenly self-conscious. That's not what I meant. Emma's heart stuttered. She needed to get out of the pool. But doing so meant exposing more of herself to his gaze. Drawing on her professional composure, she moved to the steps and emerged from the water, quickly wrapping herself in her robe. Water droplets traced paths down her neck, disappearing beneath the collar of her robe. Alexander tracked their movement, then caught himself and looked away. I should prepare for the meeting, Emma said, gathering her things. Emma. Her name on his lips stopped her. You don't have to hide behind efficiency with me. The statement hung in the air between them, dangerous and thrilling. Emma clutched her robe tighter. I'm not hiding, she said softly. I'm surviving, just like you. She walked past him to the elevator, feeling his eyes on her back, aware that something irreversible had just happened on this rooftop, with the rising sun as their only witness. 3 hours later, they sat side by side in Nakamura's corporate headquarters. Emma had transformed back into the perfect assistant, hair secured in its usual bun, glasses perched on her nose, dressed in a conservative navy suit. But Alexander couldn't focus on the meeting. He kept noticing things he'd somehow missed for 5 years. The elegant line of her wrist as she took notes, the intelligence in her eyes when she listened, the way she subtly adjusted her posture to mirror each executive. An unconscious technique that put them at ease. When Tanaka, the skeptical CFO, directed a question about cultural preservation to Alexander, Emma quietly slid a note toward him. It contained exactly the reference he needed, a detail from her research about Tanaka's history. Alexander incorporated it seamlessly into his response, watching Tanaka's expression shift from suspicion to interest. Your assistant is very thorough, Nakamura commented during a break, watching Emma speak with his team across the room. The best I've ever worked with, Alexander agreed. Nakamura studied him with shrewd eyes. Be careful, Reed-san. In business, we can replace many things, but trust, that is irreplaceable. Before Alexander could respond, Sasaki, Nakamura's main competitor, approached. The man had been trying to derail the merger for months. Reed, Sasaki said with a thin smile. I didn't expect to see you here personally. His eyes flicked to Emma, then back. Though I understand the appeal of hands-on management, Alexander stiffened. Miss Carter is my executive assistant. Her expertise is invaluable to these negotiations. Sasaki's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Though I should warn you, your assistant is a liability. People talk, Reed. And they're already talking about why you really brought her to Tokyo. Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. If you ever speak about Miss Carter in that manner again, you'll find yourself permanently excluded from any business I touch in Asia. Am I clear? Sasaki's smile faltered. Perfectly. Across the room, Emma watched the exchange, unable to hear the words, but reading the tension in Alexander's shoulders. When their eyes met, something passed between them. A current of understanding and mutual protection. For the rest of the meeting, Alexander maintained perfect professional focus, but beneath the table, his hand occasionally brushed against Emma's when reaching for documents. Each touch deliberate, each contact a silent acknowledgement of the change that had begun at the rooftop pool. Neither spoke of it. Neither had to. The line they had drawn years ago was blurring, and both knew there would be no going back once it disappeared completely. The traditional Japanese restaurant was intimate. Private rooms separated by rice paper screens, low tables, and cushions instead of chairs. Emma looked across from Alexander, painfully aware of how different this dinner felt from their usual business meals. Nakamura and his team had insisted on hosting them after the day's surprisingly productive negotiations. Emma had saved the meeting twice, once by quietly correcting a translation error, that would have cost Reed Enterprises millions. And again, by remembering a detail about Tanaka's hometown that had transformed his frosty demeanor into cautious warmth. "Kanpai," Nakamura raised his sake cup. Everyone echoed the toast. Emma sipped the warm rice wine, feeling it burn pleasantly down her throat. Across the table, Alexander watched her over the rim of his cup, his eyes reflecting the soft lantern light. The dinner progressed through multiple courses of exquisite food. Emma surprised herself by speaking up when the conversation turned to technology integration, offering an insight about user experience that made Nakamura nod appreciatively. "Your assistant understands our philosophy better than most Western executives," he told Alexander. "The technology must serve the human, not replace human connection." Alexander's eyes never left Emma's face. She sees things others miss. The weight of his gaze made her cheeks warm. She looked down at her plate, using her chopsticks to arrange a perfect bite of fish. Hours later, they returned to their hotel, the negotiations having advanced further than either had hoped. In the elevator, Alexander loosened his tie with a sigh of relief. "You were remarkable today," he said quietly. Emma adjusted her glasses. "I was just doing my job." "We both know that's not true." The elevator doors opened on their floor. "Have a drink with me." To celebrate. It wasn't a command. The question in his voice gave her permission to refuse, but Emma found herself nodding. In his suite, Alexander opened a bottle of champagne, while Emma stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the nighttime cityscape. Tokyo sparkled below them, a constellation of lights stretching to the horizon. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Alexander handed her a glass, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something uniquely him. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "All those lives happening at once. Does that bother you? The enormity of it?" Emma considered the question. "No. It reminds me that my problems are small in comparison." Alexander studied her profile. "What are your problems, Emma Carter?" She took a sip of champagne to buy time. "Nothing worth mentioning." "I don't believe that." His voice was soft but insistent. "You've heard every one of my problems for 5 years. I've never once asked about yours." The champagne and the intimacy of the moment loosened something in Emma. "People think I'm shy," she said finally. "They mistake quietness for weakness or insecurity. But that's not it." "No." She turned to face him. "I learned early that watching is more valuable than being watched. That listening reveals more than speaking. In a house with 4 loud brothers and limited resources, being overlooked meant survival. And now, what does being overlooked mean now?" Emma met his gaze directly. "Safety." Alexander took a step closer. "Safe from what?" "From this." She gestured between them. "From crossing lines that can't be uncrossed." The air between them crackled with tension. Alexander set down his glass. What if those lines were drawn in the wrong places to begin with? Before Emma could answer, a crack of thunder shook the windows. Rain began to pour, sudden and violent against the glass. Alexander opened the balcony door. "Come see this," he said. Against her better judgment, Emma followed him onto the covered balcony. The storm had transformed Tokyo into a shimmering mirage, the lights blurred by sheets of rain. The air was electric with ozone and possibility. They stood side by side, inches apart, watching the storm rage. Water dripped from the balcony edge, creating a curtain of rain around their small, dry space. "I've never allowed myself to want anything beyond success," Alexander said, his voice nearly lost in the storm. "It seemed safer that way." "And now?" Emma asked, barely breathing. He turned to her, his face more open than she'd ever seen it. "Now I find myself wanting something I have no right to want." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. "Alexander, I know the position I'm putting you in," he continued. "I know the power imbalance. I know every reason why this is wrong." "Then why are we having this conversation?" Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. "Because for the first time in my life, I can't control how I feel, and it terrifies me." Emma closed her eyes briefly. "We can't do this. You know we can't." "I'm not asking for anything tonight," he said. "I'm just being honest with you." Perhaps for the first time, a gust of wind blew rain onto the balcony, speckling Emma's blouse with droplets. Alexander reached out instinctively, his fingers hovering above her shoulder before dropping away. "This changes when we get home," he said quietly. "One way or another. We can't go back to pretending." The implications hung between them. Heavier than the storm clouds. More dangerous than the lightning. Emma nodded once, unable to trust her voice. They returned inside, the moment broken, but the truth exposed. Emma retreated to her suite, locking the connecting door behind her. She stood under the shower for a long time, letting hot water wash over her, trying to clear her head. Alexander Reed, her boss, a man feared in boardrooms across continents, had just admitted to wanting her, and despite every professional boundary, every rational objection, every risk to her career and reputation, she wanted him too. But wanting wasn't enough. Not when the consequences could destroy everything she'd worked for. In the next room, Alexander stood at the window, watching the storm lash the city. 5 years of perfect professional distance had crumbled in 3 days. The rooftop pool, the brush of hands during meetings, the honesty on the balcony. He'd built his empire on calculated risks, but this was different. This wasn't business. This was Emma, the one person who saw through his armor, who anticipated his needs, who challenged him without fear. The storm raged on. A perfect metaphor for what was happening between them. Neither knew it yet. But the real tempest would begin when they returned to New York, where reality waited to test whatever fragile truth they'd discovered in Tokyo. The Reed Enterprises headquarters felt smaller after Tokyo. Emma moved through familiar corridors that now seemed constricting, aware of the curious glances and hushed conversations that followed her. "How was Tokyo?" her colleague Diane asked, leaning against her desk with poorly disguised interest. "Productive," Emma replied, sorting through the week's accumulated mail. The merger is proceeding. And Reed, was he his usual charming self? Diane's tone made the question more pointed than it appeared. Emma kept her expression neutral. Mr. Reed was professional, as always. But Alexander hadn't been his usual self since their return 3 days ago. He maintained a careful distance. Their interactions limited to necessary work discussions, the connecting door that had existed between them in Tokyo, both literally and figuratively, had been replaced by a wall of formality. Emma told herself this was for the best. Whatever had happened in Tokyo, the rooftop pool, the balcony confession during the storm, belonged to another world. Here, he was the CEO and she was his assistant. The natural order had been restored. So why did it feel so wrong? She looked up to find Alexander watching her through his glass office wall. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, returning to a conversation with the company's legal counsel. At precisely 2:15 p.m., Emma entered his office with his afternoon coffee, black with a splash of cream, exactly as he preferred after lunch. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review," she said, placing the cup on his desk. "And the board meeting has been moved to 4 p.m. Alexander nodded without looking up. "Thank you, Miss Carter." Miss Carter, not Emma. The formality stung more than it should have. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Wait." Emma paused, her hand on the door. "There's something on your desk." For the Tokyo presentation. She returned to her desk, confused. Beside her keyboard sat a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. Emma glanced back at Alexander's office, but he was engrossed in his computer screen, deliberately not watching. She unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a delicate hairpin made of hand-painted porcelain, a cherry blossom branch with tiny pink flowers. It was beautiful, clearly expensive, and utterly personal. Emma's throat tightened. This wasn't a business gift. This was Alexander remembering how she'd admired the cherry blossoms in the hotel garden. A private moment she hadn't realized he'd noticed. She slipped the hairpin into her drawer just as Diane walked by, raising a questioning eyebrow at Emma's flushed cheeks. The whispers grew louder over the next few days. Emma noticed the speculative glances when Alexander called her into his office, the knowing smirks when she stayed late to prepare his presentations. What they couldn't see were the small changes. The coffee Alexander occasionally left on her desk before she arrived. The way he now asked rather than commanded. The moment in the elevator when his hand had brushed hers. Deliberately. She was certain. Then came the board meeting that changed everything. Emma sat against the wall with the other assistants, taking notes as Alexander presented the Tokyo merger details. When questioned about a particular clause, he turned unexpectedly. "Emma, you worked closely on this section. Would you explain the rationale?" The room fell silent. Executives never invited assistants to speak in board meetings. Emma rose, surprised but composed. "The clause protects Nakamura's cultural priorities while allowing us technological integration. It was a compromise that satisfied both parties' core concerns." She continued her explanation, aware of Alexander's approving nod and the board members' surprised attention. When she finished, there was a moment of impressed silence before the discussion continued. After the meeting, Emma headed to the break room for a moment of quiet. As she rounded the corner, she overheard two executives talking. "Reed's getting sloppy," one said, "bringing his assistant to Tokyo, showcasing her in meetings. It's obvious what's happening." "She's smart enough," the other replied. "But she's just another assistant he'll discard once he's bored. Remember Jessica from legal? Same story, different year." Emma froze, her stomach dropping. Jessica had been transferred to a subsidiary after rumors of an affair with Alexander. She'd eventually left the company entirely. "At least this one's prettier than the last," the first man laughed. "Though you'd never know it under those boring clothes." Emma backed away silently, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Is that what everyone thought? That she was sleeping her way into Alexander's favor? That she was just the latest in a line of disposable women? Worse, was it true? Was she just another distraction for a powerful man who would eventually tire of her? She returned to her desk, the board meeting victory now ashes in her mouth. Through the glass wall, she could see Alexander on a phone call, powerful and untouchable in his domain. What had she been thinking? That Tokyo had changed him, that his small gestures meant something real. With shaking hands, Emma opened a document on her computer and began to type. 20 minutes later, she printed it out, placed it in an envelope, and left it centered on her desk. Her letter of resignation, effective immediately. She gathered her few personal items, including the cherry blossom hairpin, which she hesitated over before leaving in her drawer. She couldn't bear to take it, but couldn't return it either. Emma glanced once more at Alexander through the glass. He was still on his call, his back to her, unaware that she was walking away. It was better this way. Before she lost her professional reputation. Before she became another office rumor. Before she gave her heart to a man who collected people like assets and discarded them when they no longer served his purpose. Better to leave now, while she could still recognize herself. Alexander stared at the empty desk outside his office. 3 days had passed since Emma's resignation, and the temporary assistant HR had assigned him couldn't find anything, didn't anticipate his needs, and talked incessantly about nothing. He picked up Emma's resignation letter for the 100th time, reading the carefully worded, professionally distant explanation that explained nothing at all. The office felt wrong without her quiet presence. He found himself looking up whenever the elevator doors opened, expecting to see her walk in with her tablet, and that small, contained smile she reserved for mornings. "You look terrible," Marcus, his CFO and oldest friend, observed from the doorway. "Is this still about your assistant?" Alexander set down the letter. "She wasn't just an assistant, clearly," Marcus said dryly. "Which is why you need to fix this, whatever this is." "I can't. She left because of the rumors. Because of me." Since when does Alexander Reed give a damn about rumors? Since they hurt her. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, disheveled from a sleepless night. "You didn't hear what they were saying?" Marcus studied him with newfound interest. "I've known you 20 years, and I've never seen you like this over anyone. So here's my advice. Stop hiding behind your desk and go get her." "It's not that simple." "It never is," Marcus agreed. "But I've watched you acquire companies everyone said were impossible to get. You've never backed down from a challenge before." Alexander looked out at the Manhattan skyline, remembering Emma by the windows in Tokyo, silhouetted against a different city. "This isn't a business deal." "No," Marcus said quietly. "It's more important." That evening, Alexander sent a text to the number he'd never used personally before. 1 hour. The Blue Garden restaurant. "No business, just truth. Please." He waited in the small, elegant restaurant, having reserved a private corner table. Every time the door opened, his heart jumped, a foreign, uncomfortable sensation for a man accustomed to complete emotional control. After 45 minutes, he'd given up hope. Then the door opened one final time, and Emma stood there. She wore a simple blue dress he'd never seen before, her hair loose around her shoulders, like it'd been at the pool. Without the shield of her professional attire, she looked both more vulnerable and somehow stronger. Alexander stood as she approached. "You came." "I almost didn't," she admitted, taking the seat across from him. "Thank you for giving me this chance." He studied her face, noticing the shadows under her eyes that matched his own. "How are you?" "I have 3 job interviews next week," she said, avoiding the real question. "All executive assistant positions." "You could be more than an assistant, Emma. You're smarter than half the executives I know." She met his gaze directly. "Is that why you asked me here? Career advice?" "No," Alexander took a deep breath. "I asked you here because I can't function without you. The office is empty. You'll adjust. Everyone is replaceable. Not you." The words came out rougher than he intended. "I've controlled everything in my life, my company, my image, my emotions. Everything except how I feel about you." Emma's hands tightened around her water glass. "What exactly do you feel, Alexander?" "I think I'm falling in love with you." The admission hung in the air between them, and it terrifies me. Emma's expression softened slightly, then hardened again. "Do you know what people were saying? That I'm just another assistant you'll discard. That Tokyo was just..." She couldn't finish. "I heard the rumors," he said quietly. "I should have protected you from them." "I don't need protection. I need honesty." Emma leaned forward. "They mentioned someone named Jessica." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "Jessica worked in legal 5 years ago. We had dinner once, professional, nothing more. But rumors started, and she requested a transfer. I granted it to stop the gossip. That's the truth. And what about me? What am I to you? Everything." The word escaped before he could measure it. "You're the first person I want to tell when something goes right. The only person I trust when things go wrong. You see me, not the CEO, not the reputation, just me." Emma was silent for a long moment. "Even if I believed you, there's still the power imbalance. You're the CEO. I was your assistant." "Was," he emphasized. "You don't work for me anymore. But if you came back, it would be different. Any position you want, or none at all, if that's what you prefer. And if the rumors continue, then we face them together, openly." Alexander reached across the table, not quite touching her hand. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking for a chance to earn your trust." Emma studied him. This powerful man who looked somehow smaller without his usual confidence, whose eyes held a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I have conditions," she said finally. Hope flickered across his face. "Name them." "First, if I come back to Reed Enterprises, it won't be as your assistant. I want to head the user experience division. I have ideas that could improve every product we make." Alexander nodded. "Done. What else?" "Second, we move slowly. Whatever this is between us, it needs time to develop outside the office." "Agreed." "Third," Emma said, her voice softening, "no more walls. No more hiding behind professionalism or control. Just honesty, even when it's difficult." Alexander finally reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "I've spent my life building walls, Emma. You're the only one I want to let inside them. This won't be easy," she warned. "People will talk. Let them." For the first time since she'd known him, Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. "I've spent too long worrying about what others think. The only opinion I care about now is yours." Emma felt something tight in her chest begin to unravel. I think I'm falling in love with you too." The admission cost her something. Pride, perhaps, or the last of her protective armor. But the way Alexander looked at her made it worth the risk. "Then we'll figure out the rest together," squeezing her hand. 6 months later, Emma stood in Alexander's office. Now her office too, since they'd removed the wall between their spaces after her promotion. The Tokyo merger had been finalized that morning, and the board had unanimously approved her user experience initiatives. Alexander entered, loosening his tie. "Ready for dinner?" "Nakamura wants to celebrate." Emma smiled, touching the cherry blossom hairpin she now wore openly. "Almost. I just need to finish this report. He moved behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. Have I told you today how brilliant you are? Only twice, she teased, leaning back against him. The glass walls hid nothing. They could see staff members glancing their way, some smiling, others still whispering. But the rumors had changed. Now people spoke of how Reed had finally met his match, how the company had flourished under their joint leadership, how the Ice King had thawed. Tokyo changed everything. Alexander murmured against her hair. Emma turned to face him. No, we changed everything. Tokyo just gave us the courage to try. As they left the office together, neither hiding nor flaunting their relationship, Emma realized that true power wasn't about control at all. It was about vulnerability, about the courage to risk everything for something real, and for a woman who had spent her life being invisible. Being truly seen and loved was the most powerful feeling of all.